Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Today we're halfway through our Liddell Hart book on strategy. Now, it's not the whole book, we're just covering his 8 Maxims. And again, before we get started with reading number 4, I want to thank you for those of you who have subscribed already. If you haven't already, please go ahead, get down below, click the subscribe button. Again, if you haven't already, click the little bell to be notified when I send out another video. And please share and like these as much as you can. All right? So let's go ahead and get started looking at Liddell Hart's Maxim number 4. Okay. Exploit the line of least resistance. That's the maxim. So long as it can lead you to any objective which would contribute to your underlying object. In tactics, this maxim applies to the use of your reserves, and in strategy, to the exploitation of any tactical success. All right, let's start with that last sentence real quick. Because in his book, Liddell makes a distinction between tactics and strategy. And what he does is he takes tactics at the small unit level. And anything, I guess the best way to say, kind of company level or lower, that's tactics. Anything at a battalion or higher would more or less be strategy. In fact, brigade up for sure is strategy, kind of the way he's looking. It's really gray in that battalion to division level, but I don't think it really matters at this point in our discussion, what the difference between tactics and strategy is. Regardless of that, you want to take the line of least resistance. And the key here is this. The line of least resistance has to actually lead you to the objective that is going to secure you or make it possible to achieve your ultimate goal. Okay, so let's break this one down, because that's kind of like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, but well, how? How can we do that? Obviously, there is a movement aspect to it, taking the line of least resistance, but there's also the element of the fight, okay? Fighting through the least resistance. If you look at what your opponent has brought and the way they've deployed, you may find areas where their line is thinner, weaker, less powerful as far as combat capability, being able to damage you, for example. That would be the area of least resistance. You would be more easily able to break through that line and collapse it, which puts pressure on the rest of his army, and hopefully that's in line with the objective. But that's the key there. You want to take the line of least resistance to the objective. Now, what is the objective of the game? Now, if it's killing more enemy units, well, then that makes sense. Take out these weaker ones to really dislocate your opponent's army by flanking them, essentially. If it's taking a position within their deployment zone or securing it within yours, well, it may not make sense. Why would you cut through the line of least resistance if there's no objective on their side that you have to take? What if it's holding your position on your side? Well, line of least resistance there doesn't quite make sense. It does. We'll get to that in the defensive aspects in a little bit, but looking at perspective, if there's a location where he has built up his forces strongly around the main objective, you have to take the line of least resistance that will achieve the breakthrough to get to the objective. Well, that may not be just a simple one move. And this is where a lot of people kind of fall apart when they think of, well, tactics don't really apply to the tabletop. But they really do, because there's a concept called maneuver theory. That's another series for later. But what you're talking about is dislocating the opponent. If they are taking this objective, they're holding it with a pretty strong force, whether it's well entrenched or well it's actually strong, doesn't matter. It's definitely going to be hard to break through. The line of least resistance may not actually be directly toward that thing that you need to secure. It may instead need to be towards something else that would cause those units to shift out of position in order to accomplish something, whatever they're trying to do. It could be defend an angle that they weren't expecting you to come through. It could be to move out of position so they can support a part of their army they didn't expect you to attack. What that does is it opens up, hopefully, a space in that part of the battlefield where you can then send troops, a force of whatever type, through that now path of least resistance to get to the objective. So your actual path of least resistance was actually a two-step thing. It was going first through a part of the line where the opponent was forced to dislocate and then move in the direction of your actual objective. So that's the thing you need to do. Sometimes you have to make those spaces of least resistance, those avenues of least resistance. They don't always present themselves, which is really one of the reasons World War I was so painful, because you had static, continuous defenses for hundreds of miles. So there was really no path of least resistance, and all of the efforts that either side took to try to make a path of least resistance by literally blowing it up through artillery really weren't successful. Okay, so that World War I analogy, I think, is a pretty good way of showing how you have to sometimes create the path of least resistance. Now, hopefully, you are successful in doing it, unlike they were in World War I. And if you think back on some of Sun Tzu's writings, he says some of the same things. Deception and dislocation are both part of how you get the opponent away from what it is that you need to get at. And there's a lot there. So what Liddell is trying to get us to think in terms of is to not take our force and just drive it in like a wave crashing upon the rocks. Because what happens when a wave does crash upon the rocks? The rocks are still there. That's why a lighthouse is still present, even though the waves have been battering up against the rocks for years and years and years. Okay? Now, we're not talking tsunamis, because that's completely the wrong kind of analogy here. The waves crashing upon the rocks is more what Liddell's trying to avoid. Now, if you notice, in using a kind of a water metaphor, when a wave moves in, the surf moves in toward the coast, and it hits the rocks, it's going to basically stop and dissipate and splash all over the place, and nothing's going to happen. But over just yards or miles downstream or down the coast, there's an estuary, an inlet to where a river comes out. That wave continues much further up that estuary. Not that it's going to do damage, but it's following the path of least resistance. There's nothing in the way to stop it. Okay, maybe there's a bridge across. Well, the wave gets dissipated a little bit as it goes through around the piers, but it's the path of least resistance. It gets much, much further. Okay, so that's what Liddell's trying to get us to realize is if we take our force and apply it to the enemy's force, we're just beating ourselves up again. The water on the rocks, we're not going to get anywhere. If we find the line of least resistance, we will make it further, disrupt the opponent, which will hopefully actually make some more opportunities for us to, again, find other areas of least resistance. And if I circle that back to some earlier concepts when I started this series of the Academy about making a fair fight unfair, it was all about taking this path of concentrating your combat capability onto a smaller portion of your opponent's line. Now, if you're able to maneuver around an opponent through their line of least resistance, that'll allow you to concentrate your force, your combat capability, onto a smaller portion of their line and progressively, hopefully, begin to damage them and start defeating their units in detail. Very traditional way of approaching a battle, by instead of overwhelming force, just trying to swamp the opponent with a full frontal assault. It's essentially attacking small pieces of it with large, overwhelming firepower, combat capability, and shifting as you defeat one, shifting to the next, and so on and so forth. Almost, you've heard the expression, I hope, rolling the line, the enemy line up, rolling it up, coming in from the flank and just rolling it up. Because what will happen is you begin to apply pressure to a position that's can't resist real well. It falls apart and you're intact. You're now able to go on to the next piece. It falls apart and goes away, and then you can go to the next piece. That's what happens when you apply against the path of least resistance. Okay. Now, the tabletop is a very dynamic place. Very quickly can those paths of least resistance be covered. So again, going back to his next maxim, or previous maxim, I'm sorry, make sure you adjust your plans with the goal in sight. So you may have to change direction because the path of least resistance has been fortified. That's okay. Change plans. As long as the plan you change to is still moving you toward that objective. All right. So I hope you learned a little bit on that. Hope it explained it well. If not, let me know below. If you did, let me know below. And again, please share, like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video next week. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Stick with me. See you next week. Bye-bye.